guess I can be the first person to wish you a Chodesh Tov, a Gittin Chodesh. It is officially Adar, which is very exciting because we need all of the good things and happy things we can get these days. So a very big thank you to all of you for joining us tonight, especially those of you who have your cameras on. That's an extra bonus. I'm just grateful that you're all here, but to see some of your faces is really the biggest treat of all. So thank you. No pressure to turn your camera on, but for those who have it on, it is very nice to see you. So we are going to study tonight. We're going to sort of get ourselves in the frame of mind to prepare for the upcoming holiday of Purim as we mark Rosh Chodesh Adar. We want to extend a very special thank you to Brenda and Sammy Gort for sponsoring the shir tonight. I'm going to let Brenda herself share some meaningful thoughts, some ideas with us about her in-laws and her sister-in-law, Zichronam Levracha, whom unfortunately I did not have the opportunity to know, but have heard bits and pieces over the years that we have been here. And we are very grateful to Brenda and Sammy for their sponsorship. And we are anxious to join you in doing whatever we can to elevate the neshamas of your beloved family members. So Brenda, I'm going to ask you to just
Thank you.
Sort of introduce
Well, I
us
think,
and then we'll start.
Thank you. I think it's particularly relevant that both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law passed away in Adar, because Adar is a month of strong women leadership in the book of Esther. And so we know that both Sam's mother and his sister were really strong leaders, and each in their own way. My mother-in-law, Rachel Mirel Bas Fegamal of the Yosef. She was president of the Yeshiva, the Americas of Torah, actually, sisterhood, for 35 years. And she was more than just the president of a sisterhood. She spoke to the Rabbi Baron every day. She knew every student's name. She took care of the needs of each and every individual student, the poor students and those from out of town. She made sure that they had winter jackets if they came from a poor family or from far away. And she really took a very strong interest. And that was because she loved the role that the rabbis played and the role of education in young people. And so she really supported that. But she was more than that. Her house was a bayit shechachamim. It was a gathering place for many, many prestigious people whoever came from Israel or from other places. And she also used her home in many other giving ways. She made weddings for poor families. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Hirschberg, who was one of her Landslight, and who came to Montreal actually because he was not a cousin, but after the war he came on her invitation as a cousin, and she made his helped with the arrangement, but she made his Shever Brachot. And so you have a woman who was instrumental in making sure that learning and education happened in a big way. Daphna, Sammy's sister, who was Daphna Bas Rachel Mirel, the Yehuda Leib. She was a very innovative leader in her own right. She established the Gender Studies Department at Bar Ilan University with a full PhD program. This was the first program in Israel and remained the first PhD program for many, many years as well. She cared about the role of women in society and workplace and in the home. If you ever sat down at a table with Daphna, she wouldn't ask you, she wouldn't ask her husband, what do you do? She would ask the woman, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do to educate yourself? What do you do for your pleasure? She really cared about that. She mentored many PhD students before feminism or gender studies was really well known. She would have been very proud of you, Rivki, because I think that the Yoetzet Halacha program was something that she never lived to see, and many other opportunities for women that in her day were not available. She also believed strongly in women helping other women. And so she was truly, in some ways, similar to my mother-in-law as well. She, for one thing, she was on the committee that insisted that women pilots in the Israeli army, that women could become pilots in the Israeli army. And actually her granddaughter got accepted into the pilot's course many years later. So it's a real pleasure for us to be sponsoring this in memory of these two very special women And we look forward to hearing you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that with us. It's an honor to be learning Torah with all of you, but it's always an added honor when we know that our learning is going specifically to the merit of some very special people who contributed not just to who you and your husband are, but really who contributed in so many different ways to the Jewish people, to the Jewish communities, both in Montreal and in Israel, and who just have really, who've left their mark, who really made a difference. And now, of course, as we know, all that we can do for them while we're in this world and they're in the next world is to be able to study and do mitzvot and do our part to continue to help elevate their neshama. So thank you again for your sponsorship and your partnership always with us in bringing Torah learning to the whole community, but in particular to the women of our community. So what I want to do tonight is I want to take a look at Megillat Esther, but from a different lens. Some of you are aware we've been having a weekly Tehillim class Monday mornings at 11 a.m., a little plug. We have been studying the book of Tehillim and different prakim, different chapters each week. We've been studying the chapter with Ashrei for the last number of weeks, but usually it moves a little faster. And so I have a little bit, you would say, Tehillim on the brain. And when I realized it's Rosh Chodesh Adar, Purim is coming, and there's always so much to learn from Megillat Esther. But it occurred to me that what might be interesting for this Rosh Chodesh class is to have an opportunity to look at Esther more behind the scenes. There are so many midrashim and so many fascinating commentaries on the Megillah itself, but one of the lenses that we have to view the Purim story and really to view Esther herself is actually through a parak of Tehillim, parak Chafbet, chapter 22, where we are told by Chazal, that by our sages, that this is the behind the scenes story of what was going on in the heart, in the mind, and actually in the body, of Esther, of Queen Esther, during this tremendous time of pain and suffering and upheaval for the Jewish people. Obviously, I'm referring to the whole time period of the Purim story before Purim itself, before the big salvation. What was that experience like? What was it like for Esther? And I think for so many of us, we know this year Purim is going to look different. I think it would be easier to pinpoint the ways that it's going to be similar than the ways that it's going to be different, because the list is endless. We don't even know how different Purim will be this year. As my son who's learning in yeshiva, one of his rebbeim told them recently, and I thought this was so clever, how unusual that already before Rosh Chodesh Adar, we have achieved the level of ad de lo yada, right? We just don't know anything. It's usually something we reserve for our little bit of a tipsy, inebriated state on Purim when we don't know the difference between blessing Mordechai and cursing Haman. But this year, we've been ad de lo yada. We just don't know for so many months already. I thought that was very clever. So what I'd like for us to do tonight is look at this parak of Tehillim and go through it. We're going to look to Esther as our guide, and we're actually going to look to Chazal, to our sages, and their specific understanding of this chapter of Tehillim as being, like I said before, in the heart, mind, and body of Esther. Now, there are many ways to understand this chapter of Tehillim, and I am purposefully leaving them all to the side so that we can be focused on our heroine, on Queen Esther. As Brenda mentions, right, Adar is really a month where it is not difficult to find a woman role model, a woman hero to look up to. And so I specifically want to focus on this parak of Tehillim through the eyes of Esther, even though I am acknowledging that there are so many other ways to understand this chapter. It was written by David HaMelech, perhaps with the prophecy, knowing what Esther would go through. There are many different ways to understand it. It could be referring to himself. It could be referring to the Jewish people as a whole during their time of exile. There are so many different ways to understand this chapter, but we are going to focus just on the one with Queen Esther as our guide. And hopefully we're going to see from her, we're going to take a page out of her book, so to speak, and figure out how do we get through incredibly difficult, overwhelming, and frankly, very bleak times with ourselves, with our souls, and with our sense of hope still intact. So I'm going to share my screen with you. For those of you who don't like when people do that, you'll notice, just a little tip, you'll notice that as soon as I share my screen, you have a line down the middle. You can adjust that. And if you put your cursor, you can adjust it and make it either bigger or smaller. So you can continue to see other people's faces or my face or the sheet, whatever works better for you. Okay, I am going to share. Let's see if this works. Here we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, what you have in front of you is, of course, Tehillim Parak Chaf Bet, Tehillim chapter 22. I am going to leave aside the first pasuk. As you know, for those who have been studying, we've been studying Tehillim together. The first pasuk of any parak in Tehillim is known as either the koteret, the title, or even the kitovet, the address. It is very often viewed as something separate from the rest of the chapter. This chapter, it is not separate at all, but there is so much to say that I'm afraid if I start, I'll get derailed and I won't get to the rest of the chapter. So we'll leave it at Lam Natseach al Ayelet HaShachar, that Chazal, our sages, understand that the Ayelet HaShachar refers to Esther herself. Specifically, they say that just like the dawn comes at the end of a very dark night, so too did Esther come at the end of a very dark night. They also will say about her that she marks the end of prophecy. She marks the end of open miracles. This all ends with Esther. So she is both a beginning and an end. And as we shall see, just a very unique and powerful human being that we have so much to learn from. So I'm going to read it through with sort of the explanation and the ideas from our sages, from Chazal, woven in. So feel free to follow along. She starts off by saying, Keli, Keli, my God, lama azavtani, why have you left me? Now the sages are split. When is she talking? Is this talking about the days leading up to her approaching King Achashverosh? Or is this in the moment when she is approaching King Achashverosh? I should really start with just a little bit of background. I think we're all familiar with the Purim story, but we'll just pick it up from sort of the middle of the story where the decree against the Jews has been cast. Their future is very bleak. Destruction is on its way, at least that's how it seems at the time. And Mordechai has told Esther that if she does not take an active role, that she and her family will be forgotten and the Jewish people will be saved by someone else. And in response to Mordechai's words of inspiration, encouragement, and in response to his prodding, she responds very quickly. And then from this point on in the story, completely takes over. She becomes not just the heroine, but she becomes the main character. She becomes the instigator for every bit of action that takes place in the rest of the Megillah. And what she says is, gather all of the people and let them fast. There will be no eating and no drinking for 3 days. Myself and my handmaidens, my servants, we will do the same. And then I will approach the king. That's what she says. So the question of the sages is, when is she talking? When are these particular words uttered? So there are two options. We know that she told the Jewish people they had to fast for 3 days. She herself was fasting for 3 days, a fact that will become extremely relevant as we go on through this parak and what her mental, physical, and emotional state are like. And so one approach of the Midrash is, she says, Keli on the first day. She says, Keli on the second day. And when she still doesn't feel like she's had an answer, she says, Lama azavtani, why have you left me on day number 3? That's one approach. The approach that we're going to follow is the approach that the following parak, the next 30 or so verses, psukim, were uttered by Esther as she was making her approach to Achashverosh for the first time. And as we know, she told Mordechai, the king hasn't called me in 3 days, right? I can't go. And when he pushes her that she has to go, she says she will go. V'ka'asher avadati, avadati. And if it doesn't go well, if I'll be lost, then I will be lost. But at least I will have made my best possible effort. So there's one approach of the Midrash that says, these are the words, these are the thoughts of Esther as she is making her way up to the king's court. And that as she is walking, the Midrash describes there are 7, I guess what I'd call them vestibules, 7 separate rooms that lead to the throne room of Achashverosh. And as she is making her way towards the king, she first walks into the first one, and then the second one, and then the third one. And by the time she reaches the 4th one, Achashverosh catches Achashverosh's eye. He sees her. And it's at that moment where she utters these words. Kaylee, lama azavtani, Hashem, why have you abandoned me? And the sages tell us that it was at this moment, until this point, she felt totally and completely good with her decision. She knew she was doing the right thing. She felt like she had Hashem surrounding her. The pasuk tells us in the Megillah, Vatilbash Esther Malchut, she put on her royal garments, and Chazal there say she had Hashem like completely surrounded. She was functioning with Ruach HaKodesh. She was a Niviah. She was functioning like a prophetess. And then as she enters right that halfway point, like 3.5 vestibules in towards the king, she feels it all disappear. All of a sudden, she feels like she's standing there and she's all by herself. I think it's important to note, aside from the sheer terror that I think we hear in her words, where she says, Kaylee, my God, I have a very personal relationship with you, right? It's not the God of my forefathers and my foremothers. Kaylee, you're mine. My God, why have you left me? Now, it's interesting. That's how Sefaria translates Lama Azavtani. Rav Hirsch and many others translate this as we have often heard, not Lama, but Lima. For what purpose, right? Many Jewish philosophers will suggest that it is far more practical, far more functional for a person not to ask why they have been put in a certain situation, why they have been given a certain challenge, but instead to say Lima, for what purpose? And that is really the reason why we are studying Esther. It is for what purpose did she go through what she went through? It's to help us along our way. There is going to be, as we will go through this parak, almost every single life experience that a woman can have in her life, Esther has. We might not get to all of them, but I'm going to try to touch on some of the main ones that I think are relevant and practical for every woman in her life. And we're going to see her lima, her for what purpose. And her what purpose is to show us that we can get through the same things that she herself got through. She says, Rachok mi yeshuati divrei sha'agati. I feel so far away, right? My salvation is so far. I feel so distant from you. Sha'agati, I'm roaring like a lion and nobody's hearing me. That sense of, Hashem, I know you're there, but for some reason, I feel so far away from you. Elokai ekra yomam v'lo ta'aneh. I call out to Hashem during the day, and he doesn't answer. V'layla v'lo dumiyali. And I call out to him at night, and there is no dumiyah. Now, first, this pasuk is the source that is used in the Gemara for why we read the Megillah twice on Purim. Once at night and once during the day is the specific reference here to nighttime and to daytime. But for our purposes, what I want to focus on is what is she saying when she says this? I call out to you all day and I get no answer. And at night, I have no respite. I have no break. The fascinating thing that I saw mentioned, I believe it was by Rav Hirsch, is the root of dumiyah, right? It's familiar to us from the phrase in Sefer Vayikra, after the death of Aharon's 2 sons, the Torah tells us, Vayidom Aharon, and Aharon was silent, right? And so what is she saying? V'layla v'lo dumiyali. Normally she's saying, you don't answer me during the day, but by nighttime, by the time I'm still calling out to you at night, even if I haven't gotten a response, I'm able to calm myself down. My anxiety lowers to a point because my calling out to you in and of itself is a source of comfort. It's a source of stability. It stabilizes me so that instead of my mind running, and this is maybe such a familiar experience for so many of us these days, that we think we're going to be so tired when we get into bed at night because it's been such an exhausting day, and the lights go out and the head hits the pillow and then the mind just goes and goes, and all of our anxiety is running, and the normal things that used to calm us down are not quite doing it. That's what Esther is saying. I am so overwhelmed that doesn't matter that my normal ways of coping are not working. I'm not getting any respite, not even at night. Pasuk Daled, Va'ata kadosh, yoshev tehilot Yisrael. But you, Hashem, you're so holy. And I want to add a layer of meaning to this pasuk that is so powerful. What makes Hashem so holy? So says the Radak, says the Malbim, what makes Hashem so holy are the Tehilot Yisrael, the praises of the Jewish people, are what Hashem is literally Yoshev on. If you could picture such a thing, like a heavenly throne that is made up of the Tehilot and Tfilot of the Jewish people. Hashem, you are so holy because you have surrounded yourself with our praises. And here I am calling out to you, and you pride yourself on being the God that is never far away from our prayers, and yet you're still not answering me. So here she is repeating and repeating, Hashem, I know that you're there. She never questions his presence. She never questions his power. But what she can't understand is, why is she not getting the response that she's used to? Why is she not being answered? And now she's going to really, it's going to hit home. Bechabatchu avotenu. In you, our forefathers, they trusted in you. Batchu v'tefaltemo. They trusted in you and you rescued them. Elecha za'aku v'nimlatu. Right? They called out to you and they escaped. You saved them. Bechabatchu v'lo voshu. Not only did they trust in you, but they weren't embarrassed. They weren't ashamed. In the end, they weren't disappointed. Now, there are so many ways to understand this, but if we're getting into the mind of Esther, so I want to point out a midrash that is so powerful. Esther is a woman of the Jewish people. She knows her history, right? She knows in the Gemara, she's very often compared to the Imahot, in particular to Sarah. And so it is very likely that what she had in mind when she said this was Sarah and perhaps Rivka, both of whom, her predecessors, had been captured by a foreign king, taken to live in the palace, but in a matter of hours, maybe a day at most, Sarah and Rivka were both saved. And not only were they saved, but it was, in the end, it was the cause of great wealth, of great celebration. Good things happened. And Esther is thinking to herself, where did I go wrong? What did I do that here I've been abducted, I've been taken into the palace, and nobody has saved me? Like, am I not like Sarah? Am I not like Rivka? I've spent my whole life trying to be like them. This is a total disappointment. It's shocking for her when she's processing all of this and realizing that while those women suffered, and they suffered a trauma by being kidnapped and taken to these foreign palaces, but hers never ended. She is living a nightmare, and she has been for quite some time. I want to just make one point here that's not really connected, but is somewhat tangential, and I think so important to mention because it comes up very often in my conversations with women. There is an Orach Chaim who's commenting on a Ramban on the psukim in Parshat Vayetze, I think, I'm not positive, in Sefer Breshit. The story is that Rachel has not been able to have children. And Rachel sees that the problem is not her husband, because he's been able to have children with her sister, right? So the Orach Chaim tells us that she's going through a mental process in her head, that the process of elimination of what could be the cause of her problems causes her eventually, according to the Ramban, shedibra lo kehogen, that she starts talking completely illogically. What process does she go through? So the Orach Chaim shares something, it's a magnificent psychological insight. She says to herself, okay, we weren't having any children, but I see he had children with other women. So that means it's not male factor infertility, right? The problem is not mine. I'm sorry, the problem is not my husband's. And then I see that he's having children, not just with any woman, but with my twin sister, according to many of the Midrashim, to her same biological material. Like, we share a lot. She's having children. Oh, so it must be that it's not my biological makeup. And she comes to the conclusion, says the Orach Chaim, that there's a pigam, there's some kind of emotional, spiritual issue with herself, and Hashem is punishing her. And says the Ramban, it made her crazy. And that's why she says, Hava li banim v'im ayin meta anochi. If you don't give me children, I'm going to die. That's not a logical statement. Of course, it's not a logical statement, because we are dealing with a woman who is experiencing the depths of pain that have only been made so much worse by the fact that she thinks it's her fault, that she thinks she has done something wrong. And what the Ramban is telling us and what the Orach Chaim is telling us is that this is such a dangerous path to go through. We do not know why Hashem sends different challenges to different people. We just know that they're hard. We will never know why. And for a person to decide that it must be my own mistakes, my own sins, my own problems, well, that only adds insult on top of injury. That makes it almost impossible to get through these painful things that we have to go through in our lives. And I think we can make that same argument about Esther. Here, Esther is saying to herself, gosh, I thought I was a good Jewish girl. If I was really a good Jewish girl, Hashem would have saved me by now, the way he saved Sarah and Rivka. Something must be wrong with me. So again, she has not questioned whether Hashem is there or whether Hashem has the power to save her. She's questioning her own merit. You see the process that she's going through, the added layers of pain and self-doubt that she is experiencing. She goes on to say in Pasuk Zayin, in contrast to the last two psukim where she says, you saved Sarah, you saved Rivka, va'anochi tolat v'lo ish. Here the vav is a bat, not an and. But I'm like a worm. I'm not even a person. I'm not even a human being. Charpat adam uvzui am. I am like the shame of all humanity. I'm an embarrassment among my people. And this really could be referring to how she feels, wondering, what are the Jewish people saying about me? I told them to fast for 3 days, right? I ruined Pesach, as we know. That was the date where this took place. There was no first days of Pesach that year. They were fasting. So what are they saying about me? They think I'm a nothing. I think I'm a nothing. I'm a worm. Interestingly, Chazal point out, why did she choose a worm? Because a worm is essentially the lowliest creature, but a worm has one organ of power, its mouth. And the Midrash says a worm can take down the Arzei HaLevanon, the strongest, most powerful trees that we know of in Tanakh, the cedars of Lebanon. Give a worm enough time, can work its way right through the trunk of the most powerful tree. And that this is her almost maybe beginning to say to herself, wait, I'm a nobody, but I still have my mouth. I still have my capacity to continue talking to Hashem, calling out to Hashem. That's an interesting insight, that even in the depths of her despair and feeling so humiliated and abandoned, that she knows there's still a strength within her. The next few psukim, kol ro'aya liguli, everyone who sees me, they mock me. The language is so poetic. She's describing what happens to their mouths. They curl their lips, they're sneering at her. They're shaking their heads at her. Here, Chazal tell us that she's not just referring to the people, like in theory, she's literally referring to the people in the king's court. Because the longer it takes her to go through these 7 vestibules as she gets closer to Achashverosh, a crowd is gathering, because this is news. A woman coming to Achashverosh, even if she's the queen, and she hasn't been called, this is gathering quite the audience. So not only are the guards who are assigned to each of those vestibules watching her and, clicking their tongues and sneering and making all sorts of faces, rolling their eyes, whispering behind her back, but there's a crowd that is gathering as word spreads that Queen Esther has lost her mind and she's about to approach Achashverosh. We can have in mind as well, this isn't the Esther. I hope you can all still hear me. I just got a funny notification. Can you all still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Okay, excellent. If we can keep in mind, what does Queen Esther look like right now? And this is, I think, a shiur for another time, but a fascinating thing to think about. If we know anything about Achashverosh, it's that he likes parties. He likes women, he likes beauty, he likes opulence, food, wine, women. He is not a fan necessarily of women with a strong mind. That we saw in his interaction with Vashti. So of all of the approaches for Esther to take, when she knows she's dealing with a man who is frankly a menuval, he is somebody who gets his pleasure from the basest types of pleasures available in this world, wouldn't you think it would make sense for her specifically not to fast, but for her to spend the same amount of time she did in her original, audience with the king, where she was bathed and perfumed and had her hair done and her makeup done? Like, wouldn't you think that would make a better experience, a better approach to Achashverosh? That will make a much better impression on a man who thinks in the way that Achashverosh thinks. And instead, she's showing up she must have been a mess. 3 days of no eating and no drinking, fasting, crying, calling out to Hashem, why have you abandoned us? And that's how she shows up to the king. So you have to keep in mind that they're not only thinking, what has gotten into her that she's bringing herself in here like this to the king, but they're looking at her and they're thinking, oh my gosh, what happened to her? She looks terrible. And she's coming to the king. It just creates an even more unbelievable scene. She continues to talk about how they're making fun of her. Pasuk Tet. This is her now in her mind quoting what the people are saying. They're saying, oh, she's so sure about her relationship with her God. Why doesn't she cast all her problems to her Lord? Let him help her, right? Let him be the one to save her. He likes her so much. Ki chafetz bo. He's so pleased with her. Why is she coming to this king? Why isn't she going to that king, right? So she's being knocked from every side. Ki ata, the next few psukim are, I think, some of the most riveting in the parak. Ki ata gochi mi baten. You drew me out from the womb. You took me out, meaning you extracted me. She's talking to Hashem again. Now, what does that mean that you took me out? I mean, don't we take every baby out of the womb? If the child is going to come into this world, that's how it has to happen. This, the Midrash explains, is the beginning of the heartbreak of the life of Esther. That after her mother got pregnant, her father passed away. And during the delivery, her mother died. And so it was the nightmare of all nightmares that at a time with no medicine, essentially, the birthing mother dies in childbirth, and they literally have to go in and extract the baby. The mother has died, the father has died. Hashem, she's picturing Hashem himself goes in and pulls her out of the womb. Maftichi al shadei imi. And he made me secure at my mother's breast, meaning it was like God himself was the one who was caring for me. The Midrash says actually that Mordechai's wife, who was well past her years of having children, was able to nurse Esther, that she became her wet nurse, she became her mother. Very similar stories. You're seeing a lot of parallels to the story of Moshe. So God, you've been responsible since my birth. Alecha hashlachti mirachem. I became your charge, right? I became your child, essentially. You are both my parents since I don't have living parents in this world. Maftichi, I'm sorry, imi eli ata. Alecha hashlachti mirachem, mi beten imi eli ata. From the moment I've been born, you've been Eli, my God. She started off by saying, Eli, Eli, lama azavtani. Again, my God, we have the kind of relationship where you are very much mine. And you have been caring for me since the day I was, since my birth. And I can't figure out why you have abandoned me. And she continues to call out to him. Al tirchak mimeni. Don't distance yourself from me. Ki tzara krova ki ein ozer. The tzara, the trouble is closing in on me. And there's no one to help me. Chazal here say that as she's making her way through the different chambers leading to the king, each room has a group of guards that are responsible for that particular room. And they are the only ones that are allowed to handle any trouble that happens in that room. And Chazal say that as she was passing from room to room, just as one group of guards, you could picture it happening almost in slow motion, just as one group of guards is closing in on her to grab her, she makes her way into the next room. And then the next group of guards, but as soon as she shifts into the next room, the group behind her is powerless to grab her. And so she finds herself, as we said before, about 3.5 rooms in the middle of the 4th room. And she's feeling that Hashem has abandoned her. The enemies are closing in on her. Sivavuni parim rabim, abire bashan kitruni. There are bulls surrounding me, cows, bulls, and they're not the lighthearted, they're not like the cute cows that we see in milk commercials. They're abire bashan. The Bashan is an area in Israel in the north where the soil is known to create very fat, sturdy, stocky, not happy cows, meaning like these are angry bulls. These are not the domesticated animals that we pet at the dairy farm. These are angry bulls. They're bloodthirsty, right? They see her, and it's like all the cases of the Talmud where an ox gores, where a bull goes mad. All the stories from Spain that we've seen in the news where they have the running of the bulls. That's natural, right? For them to chase. So that's how she's feeling. She's being attacked. They open their mouths like a lion that's ready to set its mouth on its prey. They are roaring. They're letting their victim know that they're coming in. I mean, the descriptions are so graphic. You feel how terrified she is. And nothing describes her pain like this next pasuk, pasuk Tedvav. Kamayim nishpachti. Like water, I have been spilled. V'hit pardu kol atzmotai. All of my bones, they're becoming separated. Meaning, like all of the ligaments and tendons, all the things that normally keep my bones together, they're melting. Hayali bi kadonag names betoch me'ai. My heart, my inner organs, my intestines, everything is melting within me. I am completely falling apart. And she means this not just emotionally and psychologically or spiritually. Chazal say she means this quite literally. And they describe, and I think it is so important to mention this because these are things that we don't talk about. We're not comfortable sharing these things. But if Chazal can talk about it, if our sages can talk about it, then we can certainly talk about it. The sages say that one approach they give is kamayim nishpachti, that she literally loses her bowels. Like she wets herself in total panic. They also suggest that during this moment that she had been pregnant and she miscarries. And what this describes is the breaking of her water and the loss of the fetus that she had been carrying within her. Like I said before, there is no experience that a woman has today that I think Queen Esther didn't go through herself. As a result of all of the stress and the pressure, this is what she experiences. The Midrash on the Megillah describes this taking place during the time where the Megillah says, Batit chalchal hamalka, Esther hamalka, Batit chalchal. And the Midrash there suggests that she had been pregnant and she miscarries. So we can understand it happening in one of two times, perhaps more than one time, we don't know, but we understand what the sages are trying to tell us. She literally feels herself dying inside. She feels the complete and total, not just loss of her own life, but the loss of her future, right? If there was ever a sense of comfort that Esther may have taken during this horrific time that she has been in the palace, it might have been that she was going to have a child. And we know eventually she does, but that is far down the line. What we see from her here is this sense, and it highlights for us the loneliness that must have been for Queen Esther. We know that Mordechai, the Megillah tells us, was walking up and down all day long outside the palace. He was asking L'Shlom Esther, for the welfare of Esther. We don't know if they actually saw each other, right? That whole interaction between Esther and Mordechai, where he tells her, come on, let's go. This is your time to save the Jewish people. That happened through a messenger. Esther was totally isolated in the palace. And maybe the notion that she was going to give birth to a child, albeit the child of Achashverosh, but this was going to be her flesh and blood. This was going to be a source of comfort for her, a source of eternity for her, a reason for her suffering. And the Midrash tells us that she loses even that. She loses even the only hope that she had left. The para continues, Yavesh kacheres kochi, ulishoni mudbak mal kochai, v'lafar mavet tishbetini. I am so dried up. You know, we're picturing her. She hasn't had anything to eat or drink for 3 days. She is dry. Her tongue is stuck to the top of her mouth. She can't get any words out. She's frozen. She feels like death, right? If all the water had left her in the pasuk before, Yavesh kacheres. Now she's dry. She's dry as a bone, dried like, old pottery. I'm surrounded by dogs. I'm surrounded by attacking animals. They're closing in on me. This pasuk, incidentally, I'll just not get sidetracked by this, but I will just mention it. This pasuk, pasuk Yud Zayin, is very often quoted as being a reference within the world of the New Testament, as being a reference to Jesus. And it's mistranslated in the King James translation of the Bible as referring to the crucifixion of Jesus. And in fact, the New Testament is very fond of Tehillim Chaf Bet because, and you can see why, it is such a potent and powerful description of suffering. And the Mefarshim, the Radak, chief among them, talks very openly about how inaccurate it is to explain the parak in that way. But I just wanted to mention that is one of the reasons why you'll see Psalms 22 in a lot of other places, not just in Jewish places. So she says, and Pasuk Yudchet, Asaper kol atzmotai hema yabitu yiruvi. I'm literally taking count of all my bones to make sure they're still here. That's how completely and totally I feel. Yechalku begadai lahem va'al levushi yapilu gural. Right? They, as I'm walking through here, they are already buying up my clothing. They're looking at me and they're already planning my. I'm going from one room to the next, and all they see is, oh, I want her ring. Oh, those are fabulous shoes. I want her shoes. They're literally picking her apart and taking all of her stuff while it's still on her body. That's the image she has of these dogs that are waiting to sort of pounce on her carcass, right? It's that. And who are all these dogs being referred to? Chazal tell us in a number of different places that dogs always refer to Amalek, that it's always a descendant of Amalek. So we see she's talking about Haman's children who are gathered around her. I'm going to skip one or two psukim here and pick up Pasuk Chaf Bet, because according to some, this is where the whole chapter changes, and this is where Esther finds her strength. Hoshieni mipi aryeh. Save me from the mouth of this lion. It seems like every time she says lion, she's referring to Achashverosh. Save me from this lion. Umikarne remim anitani. And from the horns of the wild ox. Nobody really knows what a rame is. There are some very fanciful explanations, like it's a rhinoceros, it's a horned animal, clearly. I even saw one that it's a unicorn, but I don't know how that fits so well because she's clearly terrified of this animal. But it's a big, strong animal with powerful horns. And there's two ways to explain this. One, she's still asking for Hashem to save her, Anitani. But we can also easily explain it, Anitani, you saved me. Not that it's going to happen, but that it already did happen. Hashem, save me from this animal because you've already saved me once. Now, we don't know what she's referring to. In what way was she saved? Is this the moment at which she felt Hashem rejoining her? Is this the moment at which she realized and felt the hands of Hashem encouraging her forward? The Midrash says at the moment that she got close enough to Achashverosh, 3 angels appeared. One held up Esther because she physically couldn't stand any longer. One went over to Achashverosh and raised the scepter. And the third one, if I'm not mistaken, kept everyone away from Esther, from attacking her. And perhaps it's at that moment that she felt that she had been saved. Or perhaps this is Esther recalling that in her lifetime, in her whole lifetime, there had never been a time where Hashem didn't save her. That she had been through hell and back. From the moment of her birth, she had been a woman who was subject to every type of pain and suffering. The loss of her parents, the loss of any kinds of normal life, any kinds of normal married life, Chazal say, that she may have had with Mordechai. The loss of any potential married life she may have had when she was taken into the palace. The fact that there was literally a target on her back from amongst all of the women in the harem who were so jealous of Achashverosh's liking that he took towards her. Haman, of course, and all of his family, the court in general, the court of the king, who were very suspicious of this woman who they knew nothing about. She literally was living a life filled with isolation, filled with pain and suffering. As we said before, her physical ailments, the fact that she felt so abandoned, but that she may have lost a child in this process, that she lost a pregnancy, that she became a woman who was bereft in the middle of all of this. And what she's able to say to herself is, wow, Hashem, you have saved me before. You got me this far. And then the whole Mizmor, the whole chapter, does a 180-degree turn. She says in Pasuk Chaf Gimel, Asapra shimcha le'achai, b'toch kahal ahaleleka. I'm going to tell everyone about how amazing you are. My brothers, right? My countrymen, my people. B'toch kahal ahaleleka. I'm going to tell the kahal, the kehila, the congregation, all those people who've been praying and fasting and doing tshuva and recognizing the error of our ways, we're going to turn to you and you're going to answer us. And I'm going to tell them all about it. And then she continues to call out to them, everybody who fears Hashem, join me, right? This is the turning point of the whole chapter. She again says that Hashem didn't turn her away. And this will be the last pasuk. We'll go in depth and then we'll wrap up. Pasuk Chaf Hei. She describes her experience. What was the key? At least it seems the key that Esther is sharing with us. Ki lo veza velo shikat enut ani. He does not scorn. He doesn't turn away. Enut ani, the calling out of the poor. Velo histir panav mimenu. He didn't hide his face, right? We know that the theme of the Purim story is the Hester Panim, is Hashem's hiding his face. The fact that his name doesn't appear in the Megillah, the fact that her name in Persian is Esther, so clearly related to Hester, the hiding of Hashem's face. And that what she is telling us is, Ubishav'o elav shamea, when a person calls out to Hashem from a place of aniyut, a place of total brokenness, of total poverty, of feeling like I have nowhere else to turn, you are the only one I can turn to, Hashem never turns that person away. And it's almost like she knows from this moment where Achashverosh raises his scepter and listens to her speak and doesn't condemn her to death, that in that moment, the whole story is going to turn around, which if we didn't know the end of the story, we wouldn't be so convinced that it was over. When you see this moment in the story of the Megillah, where he raises his scepter and says, oh, Esther, what can I do for you? I'll give you anything you want. But we don't know that the story is going to work out so well. And indeed, it takes quite a while until the story resolves itself. But Esther already sees in here the fact that Hashem has gotten me to this point, the fact that he is still with me, that I made the next few steps. I went into the fifth, the sixth, the seventh room. Achashverosh looked up at me and he didn't tell them to kill me. He didn't tell them to cart me away. He's with me. I recognize that Hashem is with me, says Esther. So I think we see when we look at Tehillim, Parak Chaf Bet, we see that the inner workings of Esther, of Queen Esther, are so profound. There is not a difficulty that she did not experience. And it never causes her to feel that Hashem isn't there. She never questions his majesty, his power, his control over the world. But she questions, where is she in her relationship with him? And when she realizes that she's never lost the ability to call out to him, she may feel like the world is closing in on her, that her enemies are closing in on her, that they're ridiculing her, scorning her, making fun of her, dividing up her clothes while they're still on her body. And she feels that isolation and that loneliness, but she realizes there is one thing, as Dr. Edith Eger always says in her lectures, if you've had the privilege of reading her books or listening to her lectures, she is a treasure in our time. And what she always says her mother told her before they were taken to Auschwitz, right? They can never take away what you put in your mind. Nobody can ever take that away from you. And Esther realizes that the one thing that she has always had going for her is that relationship with Hashem. It's that Eli, 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 right? Hashem, you're my God, you're my God. And she continues to call out to him. She continues to talk to him. And eventually what she realizes is through the power of her own words, the power of her own prayer, the power of who she is as a Jewish woman, she is able to turn the tide of what was going to be a horrific story about the end of the Jewish people in the diaspora. You know, one of the things we often don't think about the Megillah story is that this is the first main story we have of the Jewish people in the diaspora. This is it, right? This story is our story where we see we don't know what's coming. We don't know what's coming around the corner, not short term, not long term. There are so many questions. And what we have is the ability to look at a time like the month of Adar that we are blessed now to be beginning tonight, is we have this ability to focus over the next couple of weeks until we begin to talk about Pesach, but over the next few weeks to prepare ourselves for Purim, to think about, as much as we know that Purim is going to be different this year, but there are some things that COVID cannot take away from us. It cannot take away our power of tefillah. And really, Purim is a day of tremendous celebration. We know that. But it is also a day of tremendous koach hatfilah, the power of prayer. The Vilna Gaon, the Gra, says that this parak of Tehillim should be said instead of, Purim is on a Friday, so instead of saying the Shir Shel Yom for Friday on Purim, you say this instead. Some have the custom of saying both. The Sephardi community actually says it on both Ta'anit Esther and on Purim, which is a whole other beautiful understanding of the power of the combination of the fast of Esther and Purim. For another time, maybe we'll talk about that next year. The powerful combination, it's almost like Erev Yom Kippur with the mitzvah to eat and then Yom Kippur to fast. This is Ta'anit Esther, the mitzvah to fast, and then the day of celebration where we eat. And so the potency, the power of our tefillah, of our prayer, is something that we won't lose no matter where it is that we're hearing the Megillah, no matter where it is that we are celebrating, and we will celebrate. We are going to find things to be grateful for, whether we have to go back a couple thousand years to be grateful for our salvation in the Purim story, or we can look back not so far and be grateful for so many things, so many salvations, so many times that Hashem has saved us as individuals, as a community, as a nation. And those are the things we're going to celebrate. And we can do that while we turn to him in the kind of amazing, powerful tefillah that we know we have inherited from Esther, from Queen Esther. So that is just a little bit of insight into the experience of Queen Esther during this, this very auspicious time for prayer leading up to the holiday of Purim. So I thank you all so much for allowing us to learn together. Thank you so much again to Brenda and Sammy Goretz for sponsoring this year and allowing us to learn together in the merit of Sammy's parents and his sister, Zichronam Livracha. God willing, we should all be able to celebrate Purim with real simcha, but also, of course, with real tefillah. I wanted to just call your attention to an upcoming program that we have. Shira, do you want to tell everyone you're here?
Yes, sure, as long as my kids aren't too loud in the background here. Yes, we have a new program in a couple of weeks. We're starting a new series called a Wonder Woman series, where we'll get the opportunity to hear from some amazing different women and their different perspectives and experiences and thoughts on life, being a woman with their different careers and how they balance everything. So we're starting on February 24th at 8 p.m. with Avital Goldschmidt. She's a Rebbitzin in New York and a successful journalist. She worked at The Forward, and we're looking forward to hearing her share her thoughts and perspective with us. She'll also give a few allusions to some ideas about Esther as well, because it will be just Erev Purim. So you'll get an email about that, and I hope you'll all join us. We're so excited.
Excellent. Okay, thank you everyone so much for joining us. Have a wonderful night. Chodesh Tov. And I guess we can say Good Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom at this point also, Thursday night. That's what we're all, that's the next thing on the agenda. So please keep in mind to join us for that program with Avital Goldschmidt the week of Purim, February 24th. Feel free to join us always for our Tehillim class, Monday mornings at 11. And look out for some other exciting programs we have coming up. Thank you all so much for coming. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chodesh Tov. Thank you.
Chodesh Tov.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for being here.